luckily, that's easy because Professor, who we all know, Damian Cox, and Dr. Oscar Davis from Bond, and we certainly know Damian. And it's great to have Oscar with us as well. And they're going to be talking about Indigenous existentialism in the films of Warwick, Thornton. So take it away.
Thank you so much. So Oscar's going to talk first and do the heavy lifting, and I'm going to come in afterwards and just chat a little bit about the films. And so that's it, really. Let one just go.
Yeah, beautiful. Cool. Thanks for having us. I'll take it. Yeah, I'll click here.
So the microphone, and you put me on the recording. You want to stand here?
Oh, it's stand here?
Oh, you can get that one.
I have to stand here. You stand here. Yeah. All right, better just get into it given the time. Thank you, everyone. Sorry for reading as well. Our paper begins with an analysis between Sartre and Fanon as it is developed in the work of three prominent names in the field, Gordon, Rumden Rumluk, and Weber. We argue that negritude, and this is an idea to come out of this literature, the idea of identity, as a subject of both Fanon and Sartre's work, and in particular, Fanon's attempts to disentangle negritude from debilitating universals, reflects contemporary debates in Indigenous studies in Australasia regarding indigeneity. These discussions centre around an authentic articulation of Indigenous experiences, their projects and forms of post-colonial transcendence. That is, we see an important connection between the Black existentialism of Fanon and the Indigenous existentialism arising out of debates in Australasian Indigenous studies. We then look to how the films of Indigenous Australian filmmaker Warwick Thornton enact this Indigenous existentialism, who we argue offers a unique and valuable articulation of the lived and embodied experiences of Indigenous peoples. The first section of our paper is entitled Negritude Between Black Orpheus and the Great Black Mirage. As our analysis draws out an authentic in-between in the attempt to articulate negritude, we focus on Sartre's Black Orpheus, which appeared as a preface to Senghor's anthology of poetry, of African poetry, and Fanon's famous response to this work, to Black Orpheus. Sartre's Black Orpheus begins with a myth, probably familiar to some of us. Orpheus descends into the realm of Hades to rescue his beloved Eurydice and is granted her return on the condition that he does not look back as they ascend. Sartre's Black Orpheus poetically construes the work of the negritude poets, whose work he is prefacing, as an Orphic descent into blackness. And further, that this descent below words and meanings is a manifestation of what he termed anti-racist racism. Since negritude, while challenging white supremacy and anti-Black racism, affirmed Black superiority, there is a single idea that binds these poets from Haiti to Cayenne, Sartre argued, and that is the project to reveal the Black soul. For Sartre, this revelation is a rediscovery of Blackness. Sartre writes that the first revolutionary will be the harbinger of the Black soul, who will tear Blackness out of himself in order to offer it to the world. He continues, Black poetry is evangelic. It announces good news. Blackness has been rediscovered. By contrast, for Fanon, as we will argue, the authenticity of the negritude movement lay in its immediacy, not in the reclamation of some fixed point in the past, but in the articulation of the very lived experiences of Black people. This vital distinction locates negritude between Sartre's Black Orpheus and what Fanon calls the Great Black Mirage. Sartre saw the project of the negritude poets as an act of rediscovery, which first requires an act of destruction. This destruction was aimed at the Manichaean division of Black and white, but Sartre contended the negritude poet, as the herald of the Black soul, has gone through white schools, speaks French, the language of his oppressor, and while living in Europe where he is exiled from his body, dreams of a return to Africa where he was already in exile. This double exile of the negritude poet means that if he turns around to look squarely at his negritude, he writes, it vanishes in smoke. The walls of white culture, its silence, its words, its mores, rise up between it and him. Negritude is Orphic for Sartre because it involves this quest, which he calls an assess. Probably butchered the French there. The systematic stripping away of the European knowledge he has acquired. A regurgitation of whiteness, he writes, to arrive at the black soul which begins in a descent. Negritude is necessarily destructive because the negritude poet must find death in white culture in order to be reborn with a black soul, he writes. This rebirth he refers to as a return to origins and then a discovering and becoming what the negritude poet is. But this Orphic journey isn't just destructive in one sense. There is another. Both the objective and subjective forms of negritude poetry, which Sartre maintained come together in Césaire, amount to Sartre's central dialectical insight, which is in Gordon's analysis that perhaps white supremacy could only be negated through playing out its inferiority. Such a dialectical reversal, or anti-racist racism, he called it, puts the colonized in the place of the colonizer, the black in the place of the white. This amounts to what Sartre argued is a revolutionizing awareness, that the power of the negritude's poet descent into blackness would be realized in the ascent to a universal revolutionary consciousness. He writes, negritude is for destroying itself. It is a crossing to and not an arrival at, a means and not an end. The universal revolutionary consciousness just is the universal struggle of the proletariat. This means that the end that Sartre saw in the negritude movement was fundamentally a Marxist one. Because of this, Giselle argues that it is Eurydice, not Orpheus, who represents negritude in Sartre's view. Just as Orpheus looks back on his ascent to the living world, breaking his agreement with Hades and causing Eurydice to disappear, so too is Sartre, representing negritude as an evanescent object, a means and not an end. Sartre's concept of negritude becomes reducible to a weak moment in a dialectical movement, a brief and transitory stage towards a society without race and distinction of epidermis. The first literary movement is a white anti-racism, according to Sartre, which will quickly result in a literature where the racial criterion will no longer have any meaning. This destructive element of Sartre's construal implies that the negritude poets sought only to abolish ethnic privilege and to assert solidarity with the oppressed of every colour. After that, the subjective, existential, ethnic notion of negritude passes into that which one has of the proletariat, objective, positive, and precise. Just as class consciousness results in its own destruction as a step towards a world without class, black consciousness results in its own destruction as a step towards a world without race. Ultimately, Sartre saw the negritude poets as carrying out the revolutionary Orphic project of descending into themselves in order to reveal the black soul. But he maintained that this process of rediscovery was merely a negative moment. The race consciousness espoused in the work of the negritude poets would destroy itself because negritude is merely an inevitable and transitory stage in the movement towards a just and equitable society. So that's our reading of Sartre. Now we turn to Fanon's, I think, fantastic critique of it. Fanon, whilst acknowledging the importance of Sartre's intervention, was highly critical of Sartre for intellectualizing the experience of Black people. In Hador's analysis, Fanon asserts that negritude is not reducible to an evanescent rung in the grand scheme of the proletariat ascension. Black subjectivity demands full and serious recognition in itself, not just as a tool for some later universal class unity. But central to our purposes here is how Fanon identifies an authentic space in which to explore negritude, located between Black Orpheus and what he terms the Great Black Mirage. In challenging the universalizing ends of Sartre's Black Orpheus, Fanon identifies what has come to be a colonizing propensity in both colonial and post-colonial discourse, the attempt to understand culture through essentialist rhetoric. Building on this idea, Fanon's mirage refers to the illusion that discovering negritude, as Sartre would have it, necessarily involves a rediscovery or rehabilitation of native culture. This mirage is an illusion made possible by essentialist rhetoric, which only reproduces racism. Fanon writes that Sartre makes an Orpheus out of the Black man and Hellenizes Black subjectivity by subsuming it into the universal before Fanon could properly lose himself in what he writes is the wretched romanticism of negritude. On this point, he laments that Sartre's mistake was that Sartre found the source of the spring, but was quick to drain it dry. He continues, for some time now, there has been much talk about the black man, a little too much. The black man would like to be forgotten so as to gather his force, his authentic force. And then they came to Hellenize him, to Orpheusize him, this black man who is seeking the universal. Seeking the universal. But in June 1950, the hotels in Paris refused to take in black travelers. Why? Quite simply because their American guests, who are rich and negrophobic, as everyone knows, threatened to move out. There is a problem here, and black intellectuals risk getting caught in it. How come I have barely opened my eyes? They had blindfolded, and they already want to drown me in a universal. While Sartre's universal notion of an equal and just society unmarked by ethnic privilege is well and good as an ideal, Fanon draws attention to how the reality of black experience is replete with reminders about how this is yet to be realized. Sartre is completely unfamiliar with and unable to fully grasp the lived experience of black people, where one's difference is shoved down one's throat every single day, to quote Romden Romluck. Negritude, as an attempt to reveal the black soul, is not a transitory inquiry, but an enduring inquiry, which necessarily involves an attentiveness to the particularities of the lived experiences of black people. He writes that black consciousness is immanent in itself. I am not the potentiality of something, I am fully what I am. I do not have to look for a universal. Fanon instead argues that he must lose himself in his own negritude, which involves facing historical atrocities. He writes, the fires, the segregations, the repressions, the rapes, the discriminations, the boycotts, which constitute black identity. Without this confrontation with the truths of the past and the actual lived experiences of black people, there cannot be an authentic sense of negritude. By extension, followers of negritude who attempt to locate black identity in some fixed point in their cultural past fall prey to this great black mirage. Fanon argues that the past is not a repository in which one rediscovers pure traditions, but instead what he calls a black abyss. Hatter writes that in Fanon's view, the culture which the advocates of negritude were seeking to recover is not a living culture. It is a mummified culture, an ensemble of characteristics, of curiosities, of exotic things. Instead, the attempt to abandon the culture of the colonizer and find salvation in native culture is a banal search for exoticism, he writes. Cut off from the immediacy of black experience and fixated upon a mummified culture means that the black soul, negritude, is to be found in the past. This essentializing rhetoric reproduces racism as opposed to offering a praxis for genuine decolonization. Fanon's critique of Sartre reveals much about negritude as the task of revealing the black soul or developing a race consciousness. Romden Romluck argues that Fanon was critical of negritude in that it became an exoticized search for a universal, either as a mere transitory stage towards a collective without race, or an attempt to revive a mummified past. But Fanon sought to preserve negritude as a means of healing the wounds of colonialism, as a project which would confront the past and properly consider the reality of black experiences in the present. The nature of the negritude movement was therefore central to the disagreement between Fanon and Sartre, and its authenticity lies somewhere between Sartre's Black Orpheus and Fanon's Mirage. The question now turns to the role the past plays in the present. And this debate surfaces in Indigenous studies, such as in Glenn Coulthard's Red Skin, White Masks. Coulthard highlights in this analysis of the Sartre and Fanon debate that Fanon saw the project of reevaluating the past as crucial to overcoming colonial misrecognition, but was less willing to explore how the critical revitalization of tradition can play a constructive role for decolonized Indigenous communities. In the Australasian context, this debate surfaces in the work of Brendan Hokuwitu. I'll come back to this. Okay, so now here we turn to how we think this debates in the Australasian context. So Hokuwitu proposes Indigenous existentialism as a way of navigating tensions in Indigenous studies. In 2009, he was critical of Indigenous studies because of its tendency to focus around either the purity of a mythical pre-colonial past and or decolonization. This means, and it is here that Fanon's ideas resonate, that he writes, Indigenous studies is largely divorced from the immediacy of the Indigenous condition. Hokuitu identifies how use of reductive universals in debates within Indigenous studies denies an Indigenous existentialism by limiting the search for indigeneity to a pure pre-colonial past or otherwise within the limits of critique of colonial oppression. Hokuitu calls for a return to the materiality of the Indigenous body, a post-Indigenous studies, he calls it, which centers on the immediacy of Indigenous experience. Hokuitu illuminates a critically reflective space between pre-colonial and colonial self-identification. Hokuitu is critical of Indigenous studies as the project of preserving Indigenous epistemologies and the focus on traditional and pure ways of being, doing, and knowing. He notes that the term Maori culture has often been used to refer to pre-colonial customs and traditional practices, as opposed to cultural practices that now hold value for Maori communities. Hokuitu considers this tendency a symptom of the attempt to decolonize. Indigenous studies became about the production of Indigenous culture as if it were a thing to be viewed and preserved. The project of decolonization within Indigenous studies, he writes, should not fall into the trap of perpetuating the duality of the colonizer-colonized, oppressor-oppressed dialectic. This constant referral, he writes, to the power another holds over oneself can only lead to a state where Indigenous people romanticize a pure pre-colonial past. This debilitates an Indigenous existentialism because locating an Indigenous sense of being in a pure pre-colonial identity fixes, he argues, what should constantly be in flux, that is, culture. He adds that this emphasis ties the pursuit of identity to an eternal colonial struggle instead of framing it as the process of free beings creating identity in the face of that colonial past. Hokuitu argues that Indigenous studies ought to move beyond limitations of describing identity in terms of colonization and look towards Indigenous identity as an expression of ontological freedom. In advocating for post-Indigenous studies, Hokuitu is not suggesting that colonization has ended or that indigeneity does not exist. He argues that we ought to engage in the critically reflective project of reevaluating the essentialisms that underlie the dominant analyses of Indigenous studies. In order to make possible a study of the immediacy of the here and now of indigeneity, Indigenous existentialism involves an agential reckoning of the colonial past. That is, that one can accept the facticity of Indigenous existence, that colonization wrought and continues to wreak havoc on Indigenous people's lives and epistemologies, without reducing oneself to that facticity. It is this existential insight which we argue is exhibited in the films of Warwick Thornton. In exploring the potential for an Indigenous existentialism, we'll also employ Simone de Beauvoir's use of the distinction between immanence and transcendence. Unlike Sartre, who considers the two concepts in purely ontological terms, Beauvoir puts them to normative work. In The Second Sex, she writes, all subjects are given concretely, and through their projects they have achieved freedom only in their perpetual going towards other freedoms. There is then another justification of existence, namely the expansion towards an indefinitely open future. Each time a transcendence falls back into immanence, there is a degradation to the in itself, freedom into facticity. This fall is a moral fault if the subject authorizes it. It takes the figure of frustration and oppression. It is, in both cases, an absolute evil. The idea we take up is that transcendence names that achievement of realizing the value of freedom, the freedom of others, certainly, but also the freedom of self-determination and self-definition. Immanence is the ground of transcendence, in that the possibilities of our projects are always grounded in the maintenance of life and related to our social and bodily facticity. But it is possible to live with a predominantly immanent focus, in the capture of unreflective routine, in an emphasis on the immediate and present rather than the possibilities of our futures. This is what Beauvoir calls a degradation to the in itself. All human experience involves both transcendence and immanence, and Indigenous existentialism characterizes the challenge of overcoming a predominance of immanence, both in experience and as a coping strategy in a world of post-colonial oppression. I'll now pass it on to Damian.
Okay. Sure, I'm supposed to follow that. Let me go back to this picture. So, okay, this is Warwick Thornton, with the two stars of his first feature, Samson and Delilah. And Margaret tells me that last week, was it this week? It was Samson. This week, it was the Age newspaper named Samson and Delilah the best film Australia's ever made. So it's got heft. It's an extraordinary film. How many people have seen it? Okay, I'll just talk to you. No, all right. So I'll try and give you a sense of what the film's doing and why we think it's relevant here. Right? So this is an extraordinary debate between Sartre and Fanon happening in the late 40s, early 50s, right? So 80 years ago, and we're using concepts from around the same time. So these are well explored philosophical ideas that we think have really powerful, they're really powerful tools for understanding contemporary Indigenous attempts to establish some kind of transcendent agency in given post-colonial spasticity, given the facts of it, given the oppression of it, given the awkwardness and the difficulty of navigating your way through this very uncongenial world, right? Which is does not pay much attention to you, and does not it just reflects mostly indifference or haphazard interest or even hostility and exasperation at your ways. But this is what Warwick Thornton can't capture. So Warwick Thornton is really a filmmaker of the struggle rather than the success. But he leaves room for success. And Samson and Delilah is one film which is famously has a happy ending. His latest film, it doesn't always have happy endings, right? I mean, he made a TV series called Firebug, which ended most terribly on a cliffhanger of our protagonist about to be taken by vampires. And we never know the second series, so I know you what. But in A New Boy ends in a very great sort of cultural disappointment for the boy whose magic's gone. And last film is just released last week, called Wolfram. Has a happy ending. Spoiler alert, but it has a happy ending. You can go knowing that there'll be a happy ending, even though a lot of it's pretty damn hard to watch. Samson Clark's tough. It's a difficult film, but it is a love story, and it's a love story with a happy ending, despite it. Right. So,
Damian, Dad might not be able to hear you there. Yeah. I can see it on the board.
is there a radio mic?
Just to your right.
That one. It's missing. I will stand here and just talk so Deb can hear. All right, so it's okay, Deb. I haven't actually said anything yet. All right. So Samson and Delilah. For those who haven't seen the film, it's in 3 acts. The first act is these two falling in love. The second act is them almost being destroyed by a hostile world. And the last act, which is shorter than the other two, is about them reclaiming their lives out of all this wreckage with some help. Okay, so it's set. It was made 2009 in Alice Springs, in a remote community just outside of Alice Springs. It is very much about the experience of being in this remote community. So there's 2 14, 15-year-old kids are living, and they seem to be the only teenagers in the community. And so they don't really have friends. Samson himself has a brother. His father is away. His brother is living in a very rudimentary shed
And his brother has sort of one task in life, which is to master a particular song in a ska band he's putting together. And we hear this many, many, many times if you've watched the film. You get used to this music by the end. So the brother's playing the guitar and doing bugger all to help Samson. This kid is completely neglected, really, by his family. I don't even know how he feeds himself, to be honest. His routine is to get up in the morning and sniff petrol, just to take the edge off. Interestingly, for this whole first act, he only sniffs petrol we see in the morning and in the evenings. It's not like ruining his life. It is literally taking the edge off. It's a habit, not a good habit, but it's not what I'll call a collapse into the imminence of just immersion in this hazy drug experience. That happens later. Okay, so Samson's in this town. It's a tiny community. And so is Delilah. Delilah's much more connected, right? She's living with her nana, played by her actual nana, a very famous artist who actually just passed away last year, I think. She helps her. She's an apprentice. She helps her with the painting. And she looks after her, takes her to medical appointments and so on. So she's got a lot on her plate. She's and she's completely opposite from the shiftless, bored Samson. Well, of course, Samson is going to fall for her, and he's got a technique of seduction, which is to pick up tiny little stones and throw them at her. That doesn't, well, actually, it kind of works because she does take notice of him. She just ignores him, right? And so there's this frisson coming about. The moment where the film really registers a connection between the two is a beautiful piece of filmmaking, actually. It's a scene at nighttime. Samson comes out and starts playing his brother's guitar and dancing to his brother's PA system. He's standing there in the dark with the light coming upon him, dancing without a shirt on. And Delilah's in the car. The community has a car, and she's sitting there, and she plays music to herself, just it's me time. She plays Latin American ballads. Well, unusual choice, but they're very richly emotional, but very elegant. She sees Samson in the distance, and he's just so elegant. He just completely, you can tell that she's falling for him. And the way that Thornton does this is by, you first see Samson from her perspective with the noisy music going on and raucous music. And then that music fades out and the music she's listening to fades in, and you suddenly switch from his perspective, or his as an object of observation, to her inner appreciation of it. And that moment is the moment when you just see her and think, oh yes, these two have a future. So Samson tries to move in, and Nana is all in favor of it. He's the right sort. Delilah looks very indifferent, even hostile, but we never know sure if that's true or not. Okay. And so it looks like it's going to go swimmingly until a movie thing happens, which is a catastrophe. And it ends the first act and begins the second act. And that is the death of the grandmother. So Nana dies, and she dies in her sleep, very peacefully. The community of women, in a very controversial scene, round on Delilah and beat her unconscious as a sort of a exercise of sorry business, but a very brutal one. Thornton is not covering up anything or making sweet stories. He's actually very critical of the way this community is operating, its neglect of its children, and the harshness with which it deals with its problems. But so poor old Delilah is unconscious almost. Samson just loses it, goes and attacks his brother, gets beaten up by his brother, then runs off and causes it. He just goes crazy. He's just lost it. It's extreme distress. Then he decides, with an act of singular rebellion, to steal the one and only truck of the community, take Delilah away from this place that just beaten her up. And so that's what he does. They drive off, but he's not equipped to do this very well because he doesn't refuel or anything. He just runs out of petrol. The car stops. He gets out. They walk a long way. They get to a suburb of Alice Springs. Now we got the second act. In the cellar, they find a bridge. They settle under this bridge. They meet someone called Gonzo, who's actually played by Warwick Thornton's brother, who's also just living under the bridge. He helps them out a bit. They steal some food from a supermarket. They're getting by a bit, but it doesn't last. They can't continue to steal because security's onto them. They can't get water because the council, in the typical council way, has turned off the taps to avoid homeless people taking refuge. They're in terrible trouble, but things get worse. Delilah is abducted by youths, assaulted, raped, probably. She comes back a changed person and tries to bury herself, actually, in a really, really affecting scene. And just covers herself in dirt and lies there under the bridge. Samson has no idea what to do, of course. As a result, Delilah takes to petrol sniffing. Samson's never given it up, but now they're at it full time. And so they're living in this haze of a petrol high permanently. They were just wandering around aimlessly. As they're doing so, Samson's ahead, Delilah's behind. The car hits Delilah. This is not a cheery film, right? The car hits Delilah, and look, Samson doesn't even notice. He just keeps on. He comes back later, sees from the tracks and the tire marks and everything that she's been hit, assumes she's dead, goes back under the bridge, starts to cut his hair in imitation of her hair cutting, which was her ritual response to the death of her nana. Now this is his response, made up on the spot, to the presumed death of Delilah. And then Gonzo goes off. He's by himself. He hasn't got much food. He's got some petrol. He's got a blanket. He hides under the blanket. He sniffs. He hides under the blanket. He sniffs. We don't know how long goes by. This boy is dying. Thornton was tempted to believe at one point just leave the film there. I suspect it would have been a very hard film if he'd done that. It doesn't do that because we've got a third act. And this is the third act is the point really I want to get to. In the third act, Delilah, of course, has not been killed by this accident. She's had a leg broken. She's been taken to hospital. She's been able to connect again with community. Samson's brother gets into the act. So Samson's brother and Delilah come back to the bridge and rescue him. He's almost dead. There's an extraordinary, the scene when that happens is very cinematically powerful. I mean, it's not subtle. She comes out, she's wearing a white thing and she comes as if she's a rescuing angel. And then Samson as brother and her take Samson off. There's only one piece of non-diegetic singular music in the film, and it's at this point, and it's a cover of a song by David Gray called Night Blinders, done by Troy Cassidy Davis. And it's a wonderful version of that song and a very powerful moment in cinema. You've gone through so much, and then you've got suddenly this sort of emotional release of hope. But what kind of hope is it? What are they supposed to do now? I mean, they've been through all this. They're not really equipped. One thing we can see that their community is not equipped to face the Australian mainstream world. As they were walking through Alice Springs, trying to find their way in this weird and hostile world, they do things like, well, at one point, Delilah walked into a church, and she just walks up and down looking at the things, and a priest is there. The priest just looks at her like he's a prison warden. He's not helping. I don't think he's hostile. He's just wary. And he says, "What are you up to?" And he's just standing there, and she's wary, and she just walks out. They can't. At another point, she actually steals some paints a beautiful picture in the style of her mother, her grandmother, which is, and she's the authentic inheritor of that style. And she takes it to the art gallery in Alice Springs, which is selling her grandmother's work for something like $30,000 a piece. Nana, we knew earlier, was only paid a couple of $100 from, and so somebody's making a lot of money. She comes in and just stands in the doorway. The fellows here doing whatever shopkeepers do. They always look busy, and she comes in, holds up the piece of this beautiful, beautiful painting, just holds it up to him. He doesn't look at the painting, he doesn't look at her, and she leaves. Then she tries to hawk it around, and all these other people just like all these white people sitting in cafes go, "Oh, you're interfering with my latte. Go away." So she can't crack the code. I mean, it's not like there isn't help. Australian societies, like other societies, we have an elaborate and not ungenerous welfare and philanthropy system. But that system is highly bureaucratized and it's highly coded. You need to turn up saying the right thing to the right person at the right time, with the right forms and the right identity and the right this and the right that. And if you comply to all of this, you're going to be fine. But if you turn up clueless and inarticulate and not prepared to answer these weird, impertinent, culturally unsafe questions, nothing. And that's what they get. They get nothing. It's actually the community himself, the brother, who takes Samson. And what do? They go back to Delilah's country. It turns out that they were not living in this little community on country, not her country. Her country is somewhere much further away. So they go to her country, and the last act is just the reclamation of their lives in that country. And it's just those two. The brother just dumps them there and leaves. They've got food. Samson is injured and really useless. He's just in a wheelchair. He can't do anything. Something I should have mentioned about Samson, which is important, is of course that he never speaks. He has a terrible speech impediment. It's a stutter so bad that he only says one thing in the whole film, and that's to get some noodles of gonzo, and he gets to say his own name, but he barely gets it out. He can't. It's just a speech impediment. Delilah's worked out how to talk to him non-verbally. So they're there. Delilah has to make a life. What does she do? Well, we're going to pick up three things. First thing, she puts a cross on the wall. Just 2 sticks. She cleans that she's got a little hut, right? And the first thing she does is she sweeps it out, and then she puts together 2 sticks in the cross and puts it on the wall as a gesture of Christian faith or Christian belonging, or this is what a home would be. It's never explained. This is a film. Films show you things, don't tell you things. The other thing she does is she fixes the water pipe. And the classic white settler image of outback Australia is the tall water windmill with the metal arms going around and drawing up water from bore water from the ground. Rather than you know, as Indigenous communities have done for 60,000 years, find water in places where it naturally replenishes, the settler community goes out and finds it in places where it won't particularly and just extracts it. So she does the extracting thing. What does she do with it? Of course, she's not in the business of feeding sheep or something like that. She's in the business of getting water to live in her hut and washing Samson, washing herself, washing Samson. So there's a kind of adaptation of colonial technologies for her own very purposes and colonial ideology for her own purposes. She also hunts a kangaroo with a shotgun. Roo shooting is another classic trope of white settler culture. If you've ever seen Wake in Fright, it gets pretty scary. People do it just to do it sometimes. She's doing it to get a feed. Okay, so what Thornton does at the end of Samson Delilah very economically. He's not elaborating on anything. He's just showing these various things. He's showing how she's picking up on the sort of fundamental tropes and possibilities that the colonial society has there, picking them up, but making them her own. And the key one, of course, is the relationship between Indigenous spirituality and Christianity, which is represented by the cross on the wall. And this is kind of key in some ways because it can so easily be thought of as simply just another oppressive tool of the colonizer. Christianity is just there to go out and convince you that there's a mission and you've got to fall into the mission. And the mission is actually ours. And Thornton himself says that this is, who has some kind of equivocal relationship to Christianity and a Christian background himself, says that, look, in quotes, saying that there is no incompatibility whatsoever between Dreamtime, for instance, and Christian theology. It's just a matter of creative reinterpretation, that is, making it your own. So the key feature of moving from that he's illustrating of how to this bind. Do we go back to the what's it called, the black mirage of the past, or do we just consider ourselves as the oppressed and just spend all our energies fighting oppression, or do we make a life? And that life will borrow and reinterpret, and in some way, the struggle is the struggle to make it your own, to make that Christian creed actually your creed, as opposed to just a thing imposed upon you. Now, a film like Samson Delilah can't articulate how that happens in any depth, or it's not really in the philosopher's business of explaining that. It's in the artist's business of pointing towards it, which is what it does. So in this sense, in this film, Thornton is trying to explain or trying to indicate economically what it would be to achieve transcendent agency given the extraordinary pressures of post-colonial practice. In other films, he does the same thing. Sweet Country has a different process. It's set in the past, but it is also about a character, Sam, who has the same trajectory of taking on the post-colonial facts of his life and making them his own. Also with a struggle with Christianity. There's a lot. There's no film of Thornton's where the encounter between indigeneity and Christianity isn't present. It's a really important theme for him. It dominates New Boy, if you've seen that film. It's also in this latest film, Warfare. So that's one of the aspects, but I don't think it's the only one. There's this. It's the role of an artist, I guess, isn't to explain how, you know, philosophically things happen or how things are possible, even just to say this is what it might look like. And that's what he does. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I might ask you to field questions because I have to go to.
Yeah.